My name's Evan, and when I was 19 years old, I almost died in a cabin fire outside of Missoula, Montana. It was 2016, and my best friend Ryan and I had driven out there with a few others to spend the weekend at this old rental cabin. It wasn't much, just a leaning shack with a tin roof and a wood stove that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Ryan's uncle knew the owner, so we got it cheap. That night, we were just being stupid 19-year-olds, drinking cheap beer, blasting music off a Bluetooth speaker that kept cutting out, talking about how life was supposed to get better after school. Ryan had been going through a rough patch. He'd dropped out that semester and was working nights at a warehouse. I remember him sitting across from me at the table, hoodie up, eyes kind of tired but still smiling. He said, "Man, I'm gonna move west, start over somewhere nobody knows me." We all joked that he wouldn't last a week, but I could tell he meant it. Later that night, we stumbled back inside. The fire in the stove had died down to a dull orange glow behind the glass. Smoke hung low in the air, that kind of campfire smell that sticks to your clothes. I crashed onto one of the bunk beds at the back of the cabin, and Ryan climbed into the one next to mine. I remember him saying something like, "Night, man," and that was the last thing I heard before everything went black. Then, I woke up, or maybe was woken up. Ryan was standing over me, shaking me hard by the shoulders, his face just inches from mine. His voice was sharp, not drunk or sleepy, but terrified. He said, "Evan, get up now." Behind him, I saw this orange flicker. Then the heat hit me. The walls were already glowing. Smoke was rolling across the ceiling like storm clouds, thick and black. I couldn't breathe, and my throat just locked up. Ryan was shouting something, but I couldn't make it out. I just remember that split-second decision, pure instinct. I bolted toward the window, jumped through it, and hit the ground hard, rolling down the dirt hill behind the cabin. When I looked back, the whole place was burning. I mean, engulfed. The sound was unreal, like a jet engine mixed with thunder. Flames shot out of the windows, glass exploding, wood snapping. I screamed Ryan's name until my voice gave out, but he didn't come out. By the time the fire trucks made it up there, there was nothing left. Just the skeleton of the cabin glowing in the dark. We were all huddled together by the road, shaking, covered in soot. I don't think I said a word for hours. The next morning, they found Ryan's body under the bed frame. The coroner said he probably passed out from the smoke before the fire even reached him, that he never woke up. They told me it was fast, painless, but that couldn't be true. Because I saw him, I felt him. He was the one who woke me up. He saved my life. I told the police exactly what happened. One of the officers just gave me this look, my kind of pitying wink, and said, "Son, are you sure it wasn't a dream?" I wanted to yell at him, tell him how real it was, how I could still feel Ryan's hands on my shoulders, smell the smoke on his clothes, but I didn't. They wrote their notes, closed their files, and moved on. A week later, I went to Ryan's funeral. It was closed casket. His mom hugged me so tight. I wanted to tell her what really happened, that her son didn't die in that bed, that even in death he saved someone, but I couldn't. The words just wouldn't come out. For months, I barely slept. To this day, I still don't know what really happened that night. All I know is this. If Ryan hadn't woken me up, I'd have died in that fire. Whether it was his spirit or something else. I owe my life to my best friend, and I'll never forget the sound of his voice calling my name through the smoke. This story was sent in by a listener who asked to remain anonymous. He says this happened about 5 years ago in southeast Alaska, somewhere deep between the ridgelines and river valleys he's been hiking since he was a kid. He told me he's still not sure what he saw. It wasn't supposed to be there. The story narrates by his perspective. I grew up in southeast Alaska. If you've never been out there, it's not the kind of place you just visit. The wilderness here isn't a backdrop, and it's the main character. You respect it, or it teaches you to. I've spent most of my life hiking, fishing, hunting, anything that gets me out under that endless stretch of sky and spruce. And I've seen just about everything the land can throw at you. Wolves, bears, moose, even locked eyes with a mountain lion once about 10 feet away. It froze me to the core, but even then I knew what I was looking at. There's a rhythm to the wild, a pattern to the sounds, the smells, the quiet, but this wasn't any of that. It was late spring, early morning, around 4:30. I was about 5 miles into a 20-mile loop trail I like to hit when I need to clear my head. That early, the world feels half asleep. Just that kind of stillness that presses down on you until your own breathing feels too loud. The trail that morning dipped into a low basin, wedged between two ridges. It's always colder down there. The ground was soft and slick with mud, and the brush was high, shoulder level in some places. I had my headlamp on its lowest setting, just enough light to keep moving. I'd gotten into a rhythm, one foot after the other, when I heard it, a crack. Not a branch falling, this was sharp, heavy, like someone had taken a baseball bat to a tree, full swing. I stopped. Every hair on my arm stood up, and then nothing. No breeze. Just dead silence. I remember thinking, don't move, don't breathe, don't even blink. Because out here, silence like that doesn't just happen. Something causes it. I stood there for a long minute. Maybe 2 listening, I told myself. Maybe it was deadfall. Maybe frost cracking wood. Maybe anything. But the more I stood there, the more I could feel it. That pressure. I made myself a promise right then. If I hear it again, I'm turning around and getting the hell out, but I didn't, so stupidly I kept going. About 10 minutes later, I caught a smell. I thought it was just swamp rot when that thick. But then it got stronger. It wasn't mud, it was the smell of something dead, wet fur. Stagnant water. Old blood that's had time to curdle. I stopped by a fallen log and gagged. There wasn't a carcass, no sign of animals, no flies buzzing. Just that stench hanging in the air, thick and heavy like smoke. That's when I started feeling it. A cold pressure between my shoulder blades. Like someone was standing right behind me, staring, and then I heard whispering too quiet to understand. But it was there. It sounded like 2 people having a conversation through a wall. Muffled words. But there was no wind. The trees were perfectly still. By now my hands were shaking and I realized my headlamp was dimming. The light was fading to this dull orange flicker. Even though I'd put in new batteries that morning, I pulled out my phone to use its flashlight. Nothing. It wouldn't even power on. Something about that broke me. I just wanted light. Any light. The trail curved into a steep switchback up the ridge. I figured if I could just get above the tree line, I'd catch first light and calm down. But the moment I started climbing, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate steps in the brush, perfectly timed with mine. And then, just when I was about to turn around, it whistled, 3 rising notes, almost playful. That was it. I ran. I just ran, and I don't even remember the climb. My lungs burned, my boots slipped in the mud, and all I could think about was getting to the top. When I finally did, the trail opened up into a small clearing, and that's when I saw it. Not for long, just a flash to my left. Half hidden between the trees, a figure, and tall, unnaturally thin, too tall to be a man but standing like one. Its skin, or maybe what I thought was skin, looked pale, like driftwood soaked in moonlight, and draped over it was, I don't even know, something like moss, maybe fur, but wrong. It didn't move. It didn't flinch, it just watched. And when my eyes met where its face should have been, I realized I couldn't see its eyes. There was just darkness. And then it laughed. That sound stuck with me more than anything. I don't remember how I got back down the ridge. I must have been running the whole way because when I reached my truck, the sun was just starting to rise. My clothes were soaked, my throat raw from breathing so hard, and my headlamp was dead. But the worst part When I looked back at the tree line, I could still smell that rot. Faint but there. A few days later, I went back. Not alone, I brought a buddy. I needed to prove to myself there was something real out there. We found the spot. And on a tree about 10 feet off the trail, we saw a black mark burned into the bark, the shape of a hand, 5 long fingers. Easily a foot wide, it wasn't carved. It wasn't painted. It looked scorched in. When he got close enough to touch it, he went quiet. He wouldn't even look at me, just said, "Let's go," and started walking back. I haven't hiked that loop since. I still get out into the woods, but never alone. Never that early because I don't know what that thing was. Maybe it was someone. Maybe it was something. All I know is whatever it was, it knew I was there, and I don't think it wanted me to leave. I don't talk about this night much anymore. It's one of those memories that sticks in the back of your head like a splinter. Something you can't forget no matter how much time passes. It happened a few years ago, deep in the woods of Kentucky. My buddy and I were hiking out to a campsite we'd been to plenty of times before. We'd gotten a late start that evening, and by the time we hit the trail, it was already pitch black. Normally, I love night hikes. There's a kind of peace in it. The crunch of boots on dirt, the hum of the forest settling in. But that night felt off from the moment we stepped past the tree line. The air was thick, heavy with moisture, and every sound seemed swallowed by the dark. Even with our headlamps on full power, the light barely reached a few feet ahead before being eaten up by the blackness. A few miles in, it started to feel like we were the only 2 people left in the world. The forest was so quiet it was wrong. Just the sound of our breathing and the rhythmic scrape of our boots. About halfway to camp, my buddy suddenly froze. I almost bumped into him before I saw what he was pointing at. 2 bright dots floating in the darkness ahead of us. "There's the trail marker," he whispered. I thought he was right. They looked just like the reflective tags nailed to trees along the path. Perfectly round, glowing faintly in the light from our lamps. But after a few seconds, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The spacing was wrong, too wide, and they weren't on a tree. They were just hanging there. I took a few careful steps forward and realized those weren't reflectors at all. They were eyes. 2 massive, glassy eyes staring straight back at us from the dark. They had that eerie mirrored glow you see when you shine a light on an animal at night. But these were different. Too big, too far apart, and far too high off the ground. Easily 6 or 7 feet up. For a moment I thought maybe it was an elk or a bear standing upright. But the longer I looked, the less sense it made. There was a slow, rhythmic sway to it, like whatever we were staring at was breathing. Watching. Waiting. Then, it moved. Not a blink, not a step. Just this strange, fluid bobbing motion like it crouched down or shifted its weight. And in the same instant it was gone. It just melted into the black. The silence that followed was unbearable. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My buddy slowly reached for his knife, and I did the same. Neither of us said a word. We just stood there scanning the trees, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Eventually we kept walking, slow, careful steps, our lights sweeping every shadow. When we finally made it to camp, we got a fire going fast. The flames were the only thing keeping the dark at bay, and we stayed huddled close to it, talking too loud, laughing too hard, anything to fill that awful quiet. Every few minutes, one of us would shine a flashlight into the tree line, half expecting to see those eyes staring back. But we never did. Still, neither of us really slept that night. We just sat there until the sky started to lighten. It was like the woods had been holding something in all night and finally exhaled. Even after sunrise, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been watched the entire time. That thing, whatever it was, didn't just vanish. We didn't stay there much longer. We packed up everything and left. That night, nothing bad happened. But we all knew we'd seen something out there, something none of us could explain. It wasn't just an animal. It was something worse. something that belonged to those stories you hear about the deep woods. I used to live in central Idaho for work, not far from this little town that sat right at the edge of the Sawtooth Range. If you've ever been up that way, you know how empty it can feel out there. I used to spend most of my weekends hiking or camping alone, just exploring. I liked the solitude. It was how I cleared my head. That part of the country is beautiful, but it can turn strange on you in a heartbeat. The trees start to feel too close, the silence too thick. But back then, that didn't bother me. If anything, I found it peaceful. This happened one late September a few years ago. The days were getting shorter, and the air had that sharp, dry bite that tells you snow's not far off. I had a weekend free, so I decided to do a quick overnight trip. Nothing long, just an off-trail route I'd marked on my topo map. My plan was to cut through some drainages and end up in a high basin before dark. I'd sleep there, then loop back down in the morning. I left later than I should have. By the time I got a few miles in, the light was draining out fast. I wasn't too worried, though. I'd packed light, just a bivy sack, a sleeping pad, and a quilt. No tent, no fire. I liked to keep it simple, especially when I was solo. I found a small flat spot just below a ridge line, overlooking a narrow creek drainage. It was quiet. Still. The kind of place that makes you whisper without realizing it. By around 8:30, the wind had died completely and I was zipped into my bivvy, listening to the fabric rustle every time I shifted. The night felt heavier than usual, but I chalked it up to the altitude. Eventually, I must have drifted off. When I woke up, it was pitch black. I remember because I instinctively reached for my phone to check the time, 1:04 a.m. I didn't know what woke me at first, but within a few seconds, I realized something was wrong. My head was pounding. Not just an ache, but this deep, stabbing pressure behind my eyes pulsing in waves. It was so bad it made me nauseous. I sat up, unzipped the bivvy a little, and sucked in the cold air. That's when I noticed my breathing felt off, too. Every inhale felt shallow, like I couldn't pull enough air in. My chest felt tight, heavy. I thought maybe it was the altitude. Maybe I'd camped a little higher than I realized. But the more I focused on it, the more it felt unnatural. The headache would spike, fade, then return, sharp and sudden. It felt almost like the air itself was wrong. I was lying there trying to talk myself down, when I started to notice something else. At first it was so faint I thought I was imagining it. A sound coming from somewhere up the slope behind me. A single low drawn-out whoop, then silence. Then another one, maybe 30 seconds later. It wasn't a coyote. Coyotes yip and chatter. It wasn't an elk bugle either. Those have that high, almost musical quality. This was different. It was deep, resonant, and weirdly spaced out. Each one sounded deliberate, like something was calling, waiting, then calling again. I froze and just listened. The wind had completely stopped, and the forest was silent except for those sounds echoing off the trees. They weren't close, maybe 200 yards uphill, but the pitch carried. I've heard just about every animal sound out there. Owls, bears, lions, even the occasional wolf further north. But this didn't fit anything. After maybe 20 minutes of that, my nerves were frayed. The headache was worse. My breathing was shallow. I realized I wasn't going to fall back asleep. Not with that. Noise with my skull pounding like that. So I decided to pack up and head back to the truck. There was an old Forest Service road just above the ridge, closed to vehicles but easy to follow in the dark. It looped down toward the main access road. It would take longer than retracing my route, but it felt safer, more open. I packed quietly, trying not to make much noise. I remember my hands shaking as I stuffed the bivy into my pack. I started uphill, keeping my light low just enough to see the ground in front of me. After maybe 10 minutes, I noticed it again. That same sound, the whoop, drifting through the trees. Only this time it wasn't staying in one place. It was moving. Not directly behind me, but parallel, still 200 yards off, always a bit higher up on the ridge. and within a minute or two it would start up again. Slow, spaced out, steady. It was like whatever was making the sound knew where I was and was keeping pace. I can't explain how unsettling that was. The road wasn't far. I told myself it was an echo, or maybe a weird acoustical trick. But deep down I didn't believe that. The timing was too perfect. And all the while that crushing headache kept hammering behind my eyes. My chest felt tighter. I picked up my pace, trying not to outright run, but my body was shaking. The whoops grew softer, more distant, but they never stopped entirely. I kept climbing until I hit the old service road. Once I was on it, I turned right, following it downhill toward where I knew the main road would be. My light caught nothing but endless trees on either side, and then it just stopped. The sound, the pressure, the headache, all of it. No more pounding in my skull. No more tight chest. It was instant, like someone had flipped a switch. I kept walking for a while, still too wired to believe it was over. By the time I reached my truck, the first light was just starting to touch the peaks. I sat there for a long while before driving, watching my breath fog the windshield. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. It felt too weird to even put into words. But later that morning, curiosity got the better of me. I started looking up wildlife sounds, anything that might match what I heard. Elk, bears, owls, even weird bird calls. Nothing came close. Then late that night, I found myself deep in an online rabbit hole, reading old forum posts about strange vocalizations in the Pacific Northwest. That's when I came across something called Sasquatch whoops. I clicked a recording. The moment it played, my stomach dropped. The pitch, the rhythm, it was exactly what I'd heard up there. That same slow, spaced-out pattern, that same deep, hollow resonance. I don't want to say that's what it was. I don't even know if I believe in that stuff. But I'll tell you this, I've been camping in the backcountry my whole life. I've heard almost everything that moves or breathes out there, and that night didn't sound like anything natural. I've done dozens of solo trips since then, but I've never gone back to that ridge again in my life.